midnight on Wednesday.
It's very devastating for us. Like, we have our staff to think about, we have our clients and our families.
PUP payments will be increased and there'll be a 5-kilometre travel limit. EU to intensify talks on a Brexit trade deal amid reports of a potential breakthrough on the Northern Protocol. And Gardaí upgrade Jojo Dollard investigation to a murder inquiry.
We have known in our hearts and have accepted that Jojo is not alive.
The whole country will move to modified Level 5 coded restrictions from midnight on Wednesday after the measures were adopted by Cabinet this evening. Under the 6-week plan, all non-essential businesses will close and people will be restricted to exercising within 5 kilometres of their homes. Full details of the measures will be announced shortly by Taoiseach Micheál Martin. But first, this report from Fergal O'Brien.
Day. Members of the Cabinet leaving government buildings this evening following crunch talks to sign off on a move to Level 5 restrictions for 6 weeks. The measures are understood to include the closure of non-essential businesses until the end of November, the restoration of the pandemic unemployment payment to €350 for people earning over €400 a week. The GAA Championship and other elite sports will continue, while creches and schools will remain open, a priority according to the Deputy Chief Medical Officer.
Because we think schools are so important for children. Equally though, it's also about the evidence, and the evidence that we have shows us that schools really are not a significant driver of this disease.
It comes as the 14-day incidence rate of COVID-19 has gone past 100 cases per 100,000 in all counties, compared with just 5 at the start of October. This graphic shows the pace of increase since the start of September in some of the counties with the highest levels. Cavan in yellow is top of the list. The Department of Public Health in the Midwest region has outlined an example of how easily the virus can be transmitted. An index case who didn't restrict his movements after being abroad but later tested positive infected a number of friends and family members who in turn passed COVID onto others, with 56 people infected in total. County Clare is among the locations with a high incidence rate. In Ennis, business owners are coming to terms with the cutting back again of non-essential services.
It's very devastating for us. Like, we have our staff to think about, we have our clients and our families. I suppose it has to be safety first.
Retailers and consumers alike now hoping the affected businesses will be able to reopen in time for the Christmas trade. Fergal O'Brien, RTE News.
As we await that live address from Taoiseach, let's have a word with our political correspondent, Micheál Lehane. Our business editor, Will Goodbody, is also here. Micheál, as Fergal said there, the hope here being that these restrictions now can lead to lower restrictions for the month of December.
Yeah, that seems to be the clear logic here. This was a difficult cabinet meeting, not an easy decision, and some there not entirely convinced that this is the right move, some believing it to be excessive. But it is premised on the fact that come December, then restrictions can be lowered. Along the way, there's going to be a review after 4 weeks. Perhaps at that point, if things are moving in a certain direction, government hope that there could be some slight easing of the restrictions. Perhaps the 5 kilometres limit at the moment from people's homes, that could possibly be increased to 10 kilometres. Other things too that weren't included in the typical level 5 as it was initially devised included people being able to meet up with one other household away from their homes though, and outdoors and within that 5 kilometre limit. Also weddings, they will stay at a 25 guest list for the end of the year, and of course construction continues. The big thing throughout this from a government's point of view has been keeping schools open, but as I understand it, some concerns raised by the Education Minister Norma Foley at that cabinet meeting today. She's understood to have said that she believes that will be a very challenging thing indeed to try and achieve, to keep the schools completely open during this period.
Now, Micheál, we're going to leave it there for the moment because I understand Taoiseach now is about to walk down to the podium to give that address.
Good evening. All across Europe and much of the rest of the world, COVID-19 infections are on the rise. I want to speak to you tonight about our country's ongoing battle against the virus, about where we are in that battle, and about what is going to happen next. 2020 has been a hard year, and we're not through it yet. Families, individuals, and frontline workers have sacrificed so much. So many of the things that cheer us and that we took for granted have been taken from us. The reality of this terrible disease is that when we give it opportunities to spread, it spreads. And when it spreads, it consumes large parts of our daily lives and whole sections of the economy. As I've said before, the government cannot stop it on its own. There are no laws or powers that can change the nature of this virus. Many people have done everything that has been asked of them, but some have not. As Taoiseach, I'm asking everyone again to take this threat seriously. I want to be straight with people, lay out all the facts as I have them, and explain the rationale for the decisions that your government is making. The first thing that we need to talk about is our strategy and approach. You will have heard many potential approaches mentioned, and it's important to be clear on what is and what is not possible. There are some who argue that the country should be taking a zero COVID approach, that we should lock down the country and seal the borders until the virus has been eliminated and then maintain the infection rate at zero. The people who take this position are well motivated and serious people. However, given our geographic location and proximity to Britain and mainland Europe, and with 2 jurisdictions on our island, the advice of NPHET is, and our view as a government is, that this is simply not a realistic option. There are others who argue for a herd immunity approach, that we should let the virus run its course, and that the economy is too important for any more restrictions. This implies that we should accept higher levels of illness and death, and it ignores the deadly long-term effects of the virus on many people. The government will not be taking this approach. It is my firm belief that the core responsibility of your government and your Taoiseach is to protect lives and to protect public health, while also protecting livelihoods and supporting the wider economy and society. This is what we have done, and it is what we will continue to do. We work to suppress the virus when it is growing, and we work to reopen as much of our society and economy as possible when it is safe to do so. Until we have a safe vaccine, we must continue in that pattern. This is the reality in the rest of the world, and it is unfortunately the reality here. So where are we now in that cycle? In the effort to suppress the virus, we have already introduced what is probably Europe's strictest regime. As a result of this, we can see some evidence that these restrictions have been effective in slowing the growth and spread of the virus. However, as the daily figures show, these restrictions on their own have not been enough to significantly reduce the levels of infection. So while we have slowed the spread of the virus, this has not been enough, and further action is now required. NPHET has been clear on what it believes is needed. I would like to thank Dr. Tony Holohan, Dr. Ronan Glynn, and their colleagues for that clarity. When their recommendations come to government, we are obliged to consider them and also weigh up the wider societal impacts of very severe restrictions. Restrictions have very real impacts, including on mental well-being, capacity to treat non-COVID illnesses, unemployment and loss of income for families, and very significant social impacts, such as increased domestic violence and fewer child welfare referrals. These and the many other consequences of increased restrictions are hugely important and require careful thought. Having given it that careful thought, the government has decided that the evidence of a potentially grave situation arising in the weeks ahead is now too strong. Therefore, for a period of 6 weeks from midnight on Wednesday night, the entire country will move to level 5 of the framework for living with COVID-19. Before I talk about what this will mean, I want to speak for a moment about our schools and childcare services. It is the view of government, supported by the advice of NEFIT, that our schools and childcare services should remain open. This is necessary because we cannot and will not allow our children and young people's futures to be another victim of this disease. They need their education. The fact that we have been able to open our schools and keep them open is because of the extraordinary efforts of our administrators, principals, teachers, special needs assistants, parents, childcare providers, cleaners, caretakers, and entire school communities. They too are on the front line in this crisis, and they deserve the gratitude of the entire nation. As a government, we have invested heavily to support this effort, and we will continue to work with school leaders to keep schools open. Similarly, I want the whole country to know that we will be supporting this effort to suppress the virus again with enhanced financial supports for individuals and businesses. We will be improving the pandemic unemployment payment and the employment wage subsidy schemes to take account of the new restrictions. We will be prioritising the rollout of new supports in mental health services. I understand that social isolation and anxiety is a very real issue for many people, and especially those who live alone. Therefore, we are including as part of the own household provisions the concept of a support bubble. This will allow persons living alone, parenting alone, or similarly at risk of social isolation to pair with one other household as part of a support bubble. A full list of level 5 restrictions will be published on government.ie, but they will include that there should be no social or family gatherings in homes or gardens, but visits on compassionate grounds and for caring purposes can continue. We have decided that attendance at weddings will be maintained at 25 guests. Restaurants, cafes and bars will be permitted to provide takeaway services only. Only essential retail may remain open. Everyone in the country has been asked to stay at home, with exercise permitted within a 5-kilometre radius of your home. Only essential workers whose physical presence in the workplace are permitted to travel to work. Those who can work from home must do so. Construction work is essential and will continue during this phase as we work to tackle the country's homelessness and housing crisis, while most manufacturing will also remain open. I understand and I feel very personally and profoundly the sense of disappointment, the feelings of loneliness, perhaps even the despair that this announcement will bring for many. The days are getting shorter and colder, but I ask you to remember this. Even as the winter comes in, there is hope and there is light. If we pull together over the next 6 weeks, we will have the opportunity to celebrate Christmas in a meaningful way. Every Christmas is important, but this year it is particularly so. Each of us have our own rituals for Christmas, and they will take on an extra poignancy this year as we remember those who didn't survive 2020. Not only those who have been taken by the virus, but also all those who've passed away this year and didn't get the wakes and funerals and goodbyes that we as a people are so good at and which they deserved. It won't be the same Christmas that we've enjoyed in years past, but if we all pull together and follow the spirit of these new rules, it will be a very special time and will give us all some respite from the hardship of the last 7 months. If each of us does what is asked of us for a period of just 6 weeks, we will suppress this virus and we will emerge from these restrictions on the 1st of December. Our journey through the coming weeks and months will not be easy, but our future is in our hands. It isn't easy, but we must each dig deep within ourselves. We must persevere and we must be resilient. We all know from our life experiences that this is easier said than done. But we as a people are much stronger than we realise. We are more resilient than we can imagine. These are the toughest of times, but the Irish people will persevere and we will come through this together. Mar a deirn an seanachal, scá a chéile a bharan na daoine, go raibh míle maith agah go léir.
Taoiseach Micheál Martin at Government Buildings. Well, now for some analysis on that announcement, we're joined again by Micheál Lahan and Will Goodbody, as well as by our science correspondent George Lee. Micheál, the Taoiseach there talking about the rise in cases all over Europe and acknowledging that we already had some of the harsh restrictions in place. Now that's going even further.
Yeah, acknowledging too, though, that it wasn't enough. He said there was a possibility of a potentially very grave situation arising in the next few weeks, and that is the reason that these decisions were taken by Cabinet today, placing an emphasis too on the continued opening of schools, and saying that the government would continue to work with education leaders to try and ensure that those schools do stay open, saying too that there would be family bubbles or a situation to try and ensure that families or the elderly or the vulnerable are not isolated. Those are the kind of measures that government put a lot of thought into today, and in some ways these are the kind of things that make this particular shutdown, this restrictive shutdown of the economy and parts of society, different from the last one in March or April. But the Taoiseach conceding too about the difficulty of all this, perhaps hinting at something that many in government will privately concede, that there is a weariness within the public, and the political challenge that he has set out there and that the government are trying to address is trying to unite public support behind these measures again, but it is a daunting political challenge tonight.
Micheál, for the moment, thank you. And Will, another blow for retailers, for the hospitality sector, though construction and manufacturing to continue?
Yeah, I mean, there's no dressing this up. This is a desperately disappointing, sad and worrying night for many businesses right across the country, for non-essential retail outlets, which are closing again, just as they were hoping they'd be able to trade up to Christmas to recoup some of the losses from earlier in the year. For the hair and beauty industry, the gym and leisure industry, who said they've done everything that has been asked of them in recent months to try and keep COVID suppressed, and also for the hospitality industry, who've been struggling to remain open in the last number of weeks and now have got outdoor dining taken away from them. So there's really very little or nothing at all positive in this. No doubt as well that some businesses will not be able to make it through as a result of all of this. There will be some relief though at some aspects of it. I suppose the fact that construction, as you say, will be able and people employed in that sector, and also manufacturing as well, as the Taoiseach said. Also the increases in the employment wage subsidy scheme, which will allow that connection, that vital connection between employer and employee to continue. That's important. And also the increase in the higher rate of the pandemic unemployment payment will also help people who are losing their jobs. But what businesses say is now needed tonight is a clear pathway out of all of They say assistance for companies has to be put in place to help them out of that at the end of it all, and also steps that need to be put in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again, that we can't have a sawtooth approach to restrictions over the coming months. And in particular, what they're saying is they're appealing to people to get out and spend. Even though places will be shut physically, they'll still be able to order many goods online. They'll be able to They want people to get out and spend. They want them to buy Irish goods and to spend the money locally.
OK, well, tonight's announcement came on the back of latest figures from the Department of Health, who confirmed this evening 1,031 new cases of COVID-19. There have been no further deaths. The 14 incidence rate per 100,000 nationally now stands at 261.7. There are 298 people in hospital with COVID-19, with 34 of those in intensive care. 112,134 tests were carried out over the past 7 days, of which 7.2% were positive. George Lee joins us now from the Department of Health. George, the figures speak for themselves. Consistently over the past number of days, we've had more than 1,000 cases.
Yes, indeed. And certainly over the last 2 weeks since the first letter was written by the National Public Health Emergency Team and the Chief Medical Officer to the Government recommending moving to level 5 for the entire country immediately. An awful lot has happened in terms of the pace and the increase in the spread of this disease. There has been, since that time, there's been 13,000 extra cases in those 2 weeks, a 34% increase in our total caseload since the beginning of this pandemic. And during that 2 weeks, in 19 different counties, the 14-day incidence rate has also doubled.